Hey everyone, so this is not my normal type of content. I'm not a debate YouTuber. I've actually never done a debate before, but I've been sharing a lot of anti-generative AI content on my LinkedIn, and one of my friends who's really, really into generative AI reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to hop on Zoom and do a debate? And I was like, you know what, actually that sounds kind of fun, so let's do it. Now, my personal opinion is that I don't think these LLM chatbots are intelligent. I think they use their access to wide arrays of human knowledge to give the perception of intelligence, but there is actually no innate intelligence there. They're essentially just autocompletes that are faking it. I also don't really buy this claim that these large language models are going to replace software engineers, and his opinions are the opposite of mine on all of those points. So it was kind of fun to just get together and do a debate and share both of our completely opposing viewpoints, and I've uploaded the full clip here, so let me know what you think, and I'm just going to play the debate.
I think it's wrong to call what is happening now with AI hype and to tell people not to worry, because I think it is a significant threat to people's jobs and overall just like a massive thing uh, in much more of a way than crypto was. I think crypto was a giant nothing. I wasn't excited about crypto at the time. I didn't see why it was like everyone was taking it so seriously, but I see this as very different. And so when I see people like yourself or someone like another person I have a lot of respect for, Christopher Hoff, who I've been also friends with for a very long time, actually for him, like 15 years or something, or 20 years. And he's frequently putting out similar stuff to you, where it's like, look, what are you guys talking about? This thing is like not anything. It's going to be just like crypto. It's going to be gone soon. It's massively overhyped. So when I see you posting those things, I haven't responded to you, and I'm sure you're like itching to respond to me as well. We haven't done that because we planned on doing this, and this is a better, I think, a better way to start that off. But I would respond to Chris Hoff, and he would respond back, and we'd get kind of like adversarial, snarky, or whatever. Um, but I mean, all that to say that I think that position is steering people in a bad direction. It's telling people not to worry, and I'm not saying like panic. I'm saying this thing is real, and we have to get ready for it.
But when you say it's steering people in the direction of, uh, I guess that, for a lack of a better term, is harmful, what do you think the harm is there? So if I say, now this isn't my personal position, but let's say I say AI is completely useless, like beyond useless, it does nothing of value whatsoever. What is inherently bad about people believing that?
They will not think about their own skills and their own capabilities and their own value and how that is potentially going to be impacted by AI. If they don't see AI as a threat because it's a nothing burger and it's basically all hype and marketing and a bunch of rich people trying to get rich, even more rich, then they will ignore it. So, to answer your question, the threat, the risk of that is them ignoring something that is potentially harmful to their career.
But I think you could make that argument for, we'll use the example of blockchain, well, crypto specifically. You
Yep.
could have made that same argument for crypto. We could have said, uh, this is going to be this future big impactful technology, which is something many people did say. They were like, everything is going to be blockchain, crypto.
Yep.
There were people arguing that Doge was going to replace the US currency. And you could have made the argument back then that if you don't go out right now and spend hours and hours of your time learning blockchain, you're going to be unemployed. You're not going to be able to make it in the future. So we're sort of trying to come up with this reason for why AI is different from blockchain. Now, I'm not saying it's similar. I think most people will agree large language models have infinitely more usefulness than blockchain did. But then it still comes down to what are we thinking that, where do we think that this technology is going that is going to have such a big impact that people need to be paying as much attention as possible? And like, what even is the level of attention people need to pay? Like, do I just need to know, okay, ChatGPT is a thing and here's what it can do? Or do I need to spend hours and hours of my day learning how to use ChatGPT in order to avert whatever problem we're going to say is going to be the thing in the future?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, ChatGPT is just one app from one group, but I think I see what you mean, just AI in general. Um, no, I mean, what I advocate is people focus more on first principles thinking and like understanding their own opinions and forming their own opinions. Because what I'm trying to get to is like what comes after the job replacement, which is like more human to human interaction. So I think people need to be more thoughtful internally about who they are and what they are and like what they're about, actually having opinions. I think too many people who are in danger of being replaced by this technology simply had a job executing tasks that someone else gave them. And that didn't require that much intellect, but it required enough intelligence. And this is another point we could debate, like, is AI actually intelligence? Um, but it has enough intelligence for all these hundreds of millions of knowledge worker jobs. It has enough intelligence required that you couldn't automate it. So, which is why they have the job today. And that if the bar, this getting to your question, if the bar for AI raises above that level, so we can do basic intelligence tasks, which is 90% or 99% of knowledge worker capabilities is included in that, then those jobs go away. Hundreds of millions. I don't know the actual numbers for knowledge worker total employment, but I would say that vast majority of those jobs go away, and they're left not doing anything. And it's not like they could just pivot to the next thing like previous technology trends, because those those pivots that they will make likely are also taken over by that AI.
I understand that line of thinking of, okay, it's not like the printing press or early machine learning where I can just go into something that is not covered by the current models. But I think the idea of this just sweeping replacement where LLMs are just going to take out 90% of the workforce, I don't personally believe that that is rooted in reality. I think we're basically extrapolating with it's almost like a new car, right? If I've just invented the car, it only goes 15 mile per hour, and then if I do some tweaks to it, I spend like a couple of months doing some tweaks, it goes a little bit faster. Now we could say that if I doubled the speed in 3 months, then in 6 months I can double the speed again. And then you can just keep extrapolating, extrapolating, extrapolating. Say at some point this car will break the speed of light. Whereas I think that's what we've been seeing with LLMs is the LLM technology was very new and it had a lot of issues in the beginning, and that gave the illusion of a lot of very fast progress. We weren't actually seeing these models rapidly getting like better and better and better. All that was happening is we made a new technology that was a little bit like finicky. It had problems, and we slowly ironed out some of those problems, which made it look like it was advancing at this rapid pace. But it seems now that it is sort of capped out. I would say the leap from GPT-2 to GPT-3 and 3.5 was pretty groundbreaking. But then as I look at the newer models, when we go from 3.5 to whatever they've called it now, like 0, 0, 1, I don't even know what the naming convention is anymore. We haven't really seen any improvements. We're just seeing very slight increases in, oh, it's better at coding now, it's a little bit better at math. And what it looks like is happening is they've made the base large language model and they've refined that almost as much as they can, and then they're building these submodels to then make up the slack where it can't do math or it can't do programming or whatever other areas it struggles. So I think what we're actually going to see is we're going to see large language models as a technology just cap out. Like they're just going to hit a wall. And then what we're going to see is them start building out submodels that make them better at a specific job. Now, that would just be normal technological evolution. Like I, as a malware researcher, I got into malware analysis when it was already machine learning automated. There was still enough space in my industry where I didn't need to become an expert in machine learning. I didn't even need to touch those models. I still to this day have no idea what the virus classification machine learning models do because there was still enough space for me to operate in that field as a human. And I don't see large language models as any different from that. I think what we're going to just see is people making submodels that make, say, malware analysis better. And it's like, okay, maybe I can't do manual virus classification anymore, but I can do this other thing. And I think it's going to move slowly enough as they do that, that people can just pivot into not even different fields, but into different like roles in the same field where a lot of their skills are transferable, but rather than doing something that maybe is very pattern recognition and is very LLM automatable, they could move into something that takes the same skills but actually requires more critical thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree there's going to be pivots still possible. Unfortunately, I think those pivots are going to be mostly available to the really sharp, exceptional people who can pivot up to something much higher up in the stack, which requires a lot more critical thinking that the AI can't do yet. Um, you had the analogy there of speed and approaching the speed of light, a car approaching the speed of light. So here's what I think might be a fundamental difference in our opinions here. The speed of light that you're talking about, I agree, it would be hard to say went from 30 miles per hour to 35 miles per hour, and next year we're going to be at the speed of light. That's a crazy statement. The difference is the speed of light that we're trying to get here, that I'm talking about, is actually approaching, can it do the work of a knowledge worker, an average knowledge worker on Earth? Okay, and so my argument to you is that that bar is not high at all. So it is basically, and this is something we talked about in text, right? In the previous version of this discussion, it's like the average knowledge worker, they clock in, clock out, and I'm talking about mean, like average, just average across the globe. It's like, hey, got some new emails, respond to the email. The email says, hey, go make a list of all the documents that are related to this project. Okay, cool. Here's your list. They send out the list. Someone says, hey, I need you to write a report on how our finances are doing. So what do is they pull a wiki article. They review this other document. They talk to Sarah in this other department. That takes them 4 hours or 5 hours or 2 days or however long it takes. And they write a 4-page report. And then they take that report and they put it in an email and they send it out to the company. They are doing work. They're being paid 50 grand, 100 grand for this work. And I'm claiming to you that this is a low bar, not for AI in the future, but for AI we already had a year ago, in some cases 2 years ago. So my concern here is not about the technical definition of AI. I don't give two shits about it. People are going to argue about, oh, AGI means this, technically, specifically. I don't care. All I care about is impact to humans. So I'm claiming that the AI that we had a year ago already could do, if it were properly orchestrated, a lot of the jobs that I just described. So customer service, responding to emails, setting up like a lunch meeting, just basic tasks like that that could not be automated with regular tech, but can be automated with this tech.
Well, you see, I kind of disagree with that because I've unfortunately had to interface with LLM-based customer service agents, and they do have the flaws that both of us are familiar with LLMs. They are not deterministic. If I give it the same question 50 times, it does not have the same response 50 times. Like depending on I don't know, the star alignment, how the electricity is going that day, who knows? It
Sure.
comes out with a different response to each input. And that is fundamentally a problem because if you need a machine to do a deterministic task like finance reports or customer service, you cannot have a model that comes out with completely different answers every single time you ask the same question. And that is one of the major limitations that has been currently holding back large language models is that by their very nature, they are not deterministic. So all of those tasks you are talking about are tasks which, when you say knowledge task, you're kind of, I think, sort of talking about tasks that don't require critical thinking. They don't really require much intelligence. They're just doing like tasks that will be the same every time you do them. And if the large language model cannot even do tasks the same way multiple times, how can we then go and automate all of those jobs?
Yeah, I think it's fairly easy. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. Everyone I know who's building apps here, it's fairly easy to actually give somebody, give an AI a list and say, you can only pick from these. Like this is a thing that was solved, 2.5 years ago, probably before that. But you can make a system fairly deterministic. And keep in mind, like customer service is already horrible. Everyone already hated customer service because it was so bad before AI came out, right? So it's not like customer service is the high bar and we're seeing if we can get there. No, it's a horrible bar. Like everyone hates it already. And oftentimes it has the exact same characteristics you were talking about, where it's like you're not getting good answers. The good answer is actually somewhere there in the knowledge base, but somehow this tier one or tier two person you're talking to, they didn't find the answer. So a couple of objections to that. I don't think um, current execution of a lot of these jobs is at a high level, and that's why I think it's possible to beat it. The other thing is, um, you're not actually when your boss says, "Hey, go write a report for this thing." That is fundamentally a non-deterministic thing because the problem is always different that the human is given. So it definitely does require intelligence, right? You can't give that to a script because the script doesn't have like an if then, it doesn't have a deterministic thing to go look up the thing because the problem is always different. And this is another thing that you and I talked about before, which I thought was super interesting, is like what actually is intelligence and how much deviation from a standard slotted thing does it require to be called intelligence? So I would argue if someone is thrown a giant batch of emails and a giant batch of documents, and they're like, "Hey, Chris, hey, Sarah, go write a report on this, and I need it by today at 4 o'clock." No one person or two people or no combination of humans is going to make the same report. They're going to make vastly different reports based on how they choose to go through the documents, based on how they choose to form the thing. How long is the report going to be? If you ask 1,000 people to make a report, they're all going to be different, just like with an LLM. So, and the other thing is, just because that doesn't require like PhD level invention or creativity, that still requires human intelligence. No tech prior to AI could do that job.
So I'd actually like to go back to the customer service example because I
Okay.
think I would argue customer service is horrible for the exact same reason that the solution you proposed would be horrible. They're given these limited scripts of answers where if customer asks this, then you must answer that, and they cannot go beyond their script. So if I come up with a unique problem that requires some kind of critical thinking, although the human on the phone has intelligence and is capable of critical thinking, they are not allowed to go outside of my script. And essentially, you would run into the same problem with trying to do that with a large language model, is you've just given it a list of canned answers it's not allowed to go outside of, and you're going to get the exact same results where there is no critical thinking. We can get the argument that I don't think AI can think like full stop, but you're essentially just recreating the same awful system where it's just parroting back canned responses, and I'm trying to ask my question and it doesn't match up to some canned response that they have. So they're just repeating the same closest line that they have in their script, and then we both leave the interaction completely annoyed. And I think that's exactly what is going to happen with large language models, and it's already happening. They're just feeding their docs or their scripts into the LLM, and it's just making a worse version of a customer service representative because not only does it still have the canned responses, but it doesn't have the critical thinking to go, oh, maybe I should escalate this to my boss.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I like that argument. Um, I would say the best argument I have against that is that companies have been trying this customer service thing for decades, like human customer service with the different levels, and they have tried like millions of different things. They've tried to give people autonomy. They've tried to not give people autonomy. The system they came up with is, look, follow this script, use this document. So I would argue to you that the reason that we see this in the industry is because it's the thing that works best. If what worked best was to just hire people who are somewhat smart and give them free reign, then that's what companies would be doing. And I don't think they're doing that because it doesn't work. Now, I would argue that as you move into tier three, tier four, or whatever the structure is for these um, like more senior customer service people, I feel like that thing you're describing is exactly what's happening. They are given free reign because all the known answers have already been tried, and now they're going to have to use critical thinking.
But I think a lot more jobs than you maybe estimate are they fall into that category of like, sure, a lot of it is automatable, but the reason they need a human in that role, not a script or a machine or whatever we want to call it, is because there is some aspect that requires critical thinking. Um, like the one I will push back against endlessly until my last breath is software engineers. I think there is no point in any of the AI's evolution at which point you will be able to replace software engineers. And I think the disconnect that happens is a lot of the non-software engineers or even the vibe coders, the people who just don't fully understand software engineering, don't understand the difference between writing code and designing software. So they're looking at
Yeah.
ChatGPT and Cursor and Gemini or whatever, and they're looking, oh, I can put in a query and it shits out all of this code. And they're like, that is what coding is. So they're like, that very easily could replace software engineering. But because they're not a software engineer, they don't understand the amount of critical thinking and design decisions that actually go into the software. I think a lot of software engineers will say that writing code is like 10% of software engineering. But then if you're not a software engineer, you're looking at that small percentage that the AI, okay, it sort of can do that, and then ignoring the rest. And I think the same is true for every role. Until you actually have like spent a year in any given job, you don't really understand how much is automatable versus how much actually does require a human with critical thinking. So my personal belief is I think for the large, like the overwhelming majority of all roles, there will never, ever be a point in which AI replaces that person. It might be able to make the person faster. You might be able to take one person and have them do work at a slightly more productive rate. But I don't think there is any point in which AI actually starts replacing like large swaths of the job market.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. So let me give you a counterpoint. And this is anecdata, of course, but I have a close friend who is a cardiologist, like actual MD, actually sits in the doctor's office every day. He also happens to be a bug bounty hunter and like a programmer. So he is using whatever tools are approved at his particular job. And he is now finding, as of like this is 6 months ago, this is a year ago, um, the analysis that this thing is doing is as good or better in some cases than the thing that he was going to write. So this is at the cardiologist level, not even like a nursing level. This is really, really advanced stuff. So it's taking all the inputs that came from like the patient and also from his notes. It's combining all that together with, of course, the knowledge of the model itself, and then giving out recommendations, recommending the actual drugs. And so my thing is like, if this thing is actually doing the job, and it's not just one person, right? A lot of doctors are actually saying that the output is matching their capabilities as well. We've already seen this with analyzing moles. We've seen this like in lots of different places. And that brings me back to this one other point that you made earlier, which I thought was really interesting. How they're going to hit a wall, the LLMs hit a wall, and they basically start building subsystems. This is exactly how I define AGI. I don't think AGI is going to be some breakthrough, generally intelligent thing. I think that is more of an AI breakthrough than we've actually seen. I don't think it's happened yet. What I'm arguing is going to replace the average knowledge worker is actually one of these Frankenstein systems where the LLM is like an orchestrator, and it's basically spinning up these individual things to go and accomplish individual tasks, like write the email, organize the event, organize the conference, summarize this or whatever. So it's going to have at its disposal dozens or hundreds of these little workers. But the problem is that you're going to buy this thing, let's call it a synth worker or whatever the stupid AI company is going to be called. You buy synth worker. Synth worker shows up to work on Monday. It goes to the onboarding meeting. It talks to the manager. It talks to all its team members. It reads Slack. It reads the wiki, and it starts working just like a regular employee. And it produces the work of a regular employee. And I would argue, in a lot of cases, even better. But if you look under the hood, it's not some all-intelligent AI system. It's actually a whole bunch of tricks. It's like this big agent orchestrating a whole bunch of other ones. But functionally, what you end up with is this new AI named Julie actually does the work. And guess what? We didn't hire a human to do that job.
So I guess the first thing I'd say is that is not the definition of AGI that most people are going with, but it is a fair point. A lot of people have this idea of if we give the LLMs enough data, at some point they start learning for themselves, and at some point they can do all of these things that the submodels are doing, which I think most likely we both agree that that's horseshit. That's never happening. But then the problem is when it comes to customizing these models, now you need a custom model for everything. You need
Yeah.
your model to identify tumors, and that is no different from where we've been. Like that is what we've been doing for the past I don't know, probably longer than I've been alive, like 30 years, maybe more. And that hasn't replaced humans. I would go back to my own personal example, which is machine learning based malware detection. Those machines have massively improved malware detection. Like back in the old days, you would have to open up a virus. You would have to manually determine that this is actually malicious code and then enter a signature into a database. And can you imagine like a human trying to do that with billions and billions of new files every single day? It's
Yep.
impossible. So we built machine learning models to do that. But then the question is, well, how many malware analysts got laid off as a result? And the answer is there's actually more malware analysts today than there was in those days before the machine learning based virus classification. And the reason was the classification could only do so much. You still needed people to check false positives. You still needed people to write reports. And there was always a place for humans. And it wasn't even different skills. Like my job has been automated 3 times now. And in none of those 3 times have I had to even learn like some massively different skill set. I've always been able to pivot. And I think that is all we're going to see with that is like, okay, maybe our cardiologist AI can automate a lot of that. So the cardiologists end up doing something else. I can't say what else they might end up doing because that's not my field and I don't know anything about it. But I do know that in my field, we have just been automating every single thing. We've been building submodels for malware classification. We've built submodels for security alerts. We built submodels for analyzing code. And we built up all of these submodels, but there's 2 problems there. The first is there is no evidence of it ever actually replacing humans. In fact, the industry has grown by a factor of 10 since these machine learning models started coming out. And the second thing is they're very expensive to produce and maintain. So you're not actually getting the thing which is that the AI companies are trying to sell people on, which is, oh, you can get rid of your employees. Get rid of Greg, get rid of Simon, get rid of Sandra, and just keep all their salaries. Just pay $20 a month for this AI subscription, and now you're saving all of this money. But then when it comes to the actual who's maintaining these models, who's updating them for the latest whatever it is they're doing, because
Hmm.
like obviously the technologies that they're working on are always changing. So someone has to maintain these models, and they're phenomenally expensive to run. Like any kind of pattern matching model requires insane amounts of computational power. And what's actually just happening is you're taking those salaries, and I don't think you're even cutting them. You're actually spending more running these models or paying to have the models run than you would be having employees do it. It only makes sense when you're operating at scale where employees physically, like there aren't enough employees to do this thing. Like imagine if you had to hire humans to manually categorize a billion malware samples, like it just wouldn't be possible. But when it actually comes to, hey, let's replace a human with this AI, it usually ends up just working out more expensive. And the only reason we haven't started seeing that with LLMs yet is because they're being subsidized by VCs. We don't see how much, I'm just going to say ChatGPT because that's the one most people
Sure,
are
sure.
familiar with. We don't really see how much ChatGPT costs to actually operate. We don't know how much they're spending on acquiring the training data, training the model, how much computational power is being used, how much electricity is being used. And then when you think about a actual human being, it's just some cells. They need a little bit of water, a little bit of glucose. The amount of money it costs to operate a actual human being is almost zero. The only reason it's not zero is because of capitalism. We've made houses so expensive, so now they've got to pay rent, and we want to make a profit selling food, so now they've got to buy like this 1 cent banana is now $1. So we've basically just increased the cost of running humans to the point where these machines now look compatible. But then when you try and actually replace the humans, you're just going to run into the exact same problem, which is these machines are expensive. They may not need to pay rent. Actually, technically, they do need to pay rent. You need a data center. But they
Mhm.
may not need to eat. They may not need water. They may not need plumbing. But they need $1 billion, $1 trillion worth of GPUs, a ton of electricity, a ton of cooling. And I actually don't think we are going to reach a point where we can make like computational based intelligence more cheaper than the equivalent human intelligence. I think right
Mm.
now we're in, uh, I call it sort of the utopia era, even though I don't feel like we're in a utopia. I think everything is terrible. I hate what's going on with AI. It
Yeah.
makes me miserable. But it reminds me of in LA, we had this thing called, well, it's quite widespread now, but we had this program called the Bird Scooter. And it was actually the very first Bird Scooter was in LA. And I was there for the pilot program. It's like, okay, free public transport. You pay like maybe $1 at most. You can go anywhere. You can leave the scooter anywhere you want. And I was like, this is incredible. Like, this is going to revolutionize transport. I can go from point A to point B. I don't need to find parking. It costs me $1. Like, this is perfect. But what was actually happening on the back end is VCs were pouring billions and billions of dollars into this system to try and like build out this company. And what was happening is people were getting hit by cars. They were throwing the scooters into rivers and oceans, and they were actually losing more money to running this program than they were ever going to make. And I think we're seeing the same thing start to happen with AI, is it's being funded by VCs, but there's not really yet any certain path where it's even going to be profitable. Like
Yeah.
they are currently operating at a loss, and they're selling us on this idea that at some point you will be able to run like a agentic AI or whatever for less than the equivalent of an employee. But I actually don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to reach a point where computers are cheap enough to run that we can replace humans with these AI agents. And I think the more that we start going from this idea, which is never going to work, of a single AI that is just able to do everything, to building out submodels, I think that's just it's going to compound the cost. We're just going to get
Mm.
more and more and more cost to the point where eventually we'll come to the realization that actually it's cheaper to just hire humans.
Okay. I like this argument. I find that interesting. I don't believe it's true. My intuition is that it's not true, and the reason for that is just the amount that the costs are falling, and the fact that I think we're so bad at what we're doing right now with artificial intelligence. I think there's so much slack in the rope that I think we're going to end up getting, 99% or whatever, some dramatic amount of the cost that we're paying now just will keep falling out and falling out. But I would say that's an empirical question, and we'll just have to like see how that works out, because I do agree with you that the current state is like a state of confusion, because you don't know how much it's being propped up. So I like your argument, and I definitely think there will be an effect from what you're saying. I I um I want to touch on this whole concept of intelligence itself, and like, because I feel like we were trying to define it before, when we had the previous conversation. We were trying to define like what exactly do we mean by it. So I think the way that I defined it before was, or at least the way that I want to define it now, which I think is roughly similar: the ability to solve everyday human problems using knowledge about the world. So I think that I try to hit it from a bunch of angles, and I think that accounts for why an average knowledge worker can't be automated. And I put every day in there because it's basic stuff like, should I break up with my boyfriend? Oh, and keep in mind, just the case of like how useful this stuff is. I think the current numbers are OpenAI or ChatGPT has like 1 billion users per day. So I feel like for everyday problems, it's if we're using that as a metric, doesn't that to me indicates that it's very useful. But I guess that's a red herring, because you already acknowledge that it's useful. Um, but I've got some examples of like things that ChatGPT is really good at. So write an essay about a book that you read. It could already write pretty good essays. Oh, and by the way, this is unrelated to the debate, but we actually blew by the Turing test, because most people can't tell the difference between AI and humans at this point, because it's already I just thought it was an interesting piece of trivia that used to be the gold standard for AI, and now no one even cares that we passed it.
I thought
Managing,
that that one was actually passed with the very early GPT. I thought
I
that
think it
they
might have,
maybe
yeah,
they because I mean on so as like putting my like my philosophy hat on instead of my scientist hat on, I have never ever seen the Turing test as a reliable metric for anything. Because
yeah,
essentially, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it is just you put a machine and you put a person, uh, like basically concealed from the person they're talking to. And the question is, can that person distinguish between a machine or a human conversation? But the bar for that is very low because your
yeah,
average person will spend like 30 hours arguing with a troll bot on Twitter, not realizing that that is a Python
yeah,
script. So I've always felt that Turing test is more a test of humans' lack of ability to distinguish a real human rather than AI being successful at what it does. Now, granted, I will concede that AI is, or at least LLMs are very, very good at imitating human-like conversation. I will give them that, but there is a huge difference between imitating human-like conversation and human intelligence, which is why I believe that people aren't they're not seeing it passing the Turing test as this amazing feat because it's not showing that the AI can mimic human intelligence. It's showing that it can mimic human conversation, which is a very different thing.
yeah. That makes sense. I think we agree there. So what about this definition that I'm using? And I can't remember the exact definitions that we used before. We had a slight disagreement there, but what do you think about this? The ability to solve everyday human problems using knowledge about the world. So it's kind of general, right? And it's general in the sense that a knowledge worker could do it. It's general in the sense that AGI would be able to do it. ASI obviously would be able to do it. But I've got examples here: managing someone's daily schedule, writing performance review for an employee, reading and answering emails, writing code for an application at a company. By the way, I completely agreed with your differentiation between writing code and doing software engineering or software architecture. Completely agree with you there. I think that's a big thing that vibe coding is missing out on. Writing a requirements document based on conversations, writing a work status update for your boss, plan a 4-day trip to Switzerland. So these are my examples of like everyday human problems that are nowhere near free like automation could possibly even try to do versus with AI, these are kind of like trivial. And I would argue that these are the types of things that are going to make up a human replacing AI in the workforce.
I'm not sure I agree because uh, the point on can it I mean it goes back to your general knowledge worker point, the question of can it replace a average worker, and we've talked about that already, but I don't think that is the definition of intelligence. For me, the definition of intelligence is not the ability to perform a task that wasn't performable by previous automation. It is the ability to work with incomplete information. Like if I were to, I don't know, let's say I build you a puzzle and I take away some of the pieces. Let's say I take away five of the pieces, and I give you the puzzle with the without those pieces that I took away, you could probably at some level redraw the rest of the puzzle, right? You could use your critical thinking and your intelligence to see, oh, okay, I don't have all the pieces here, but I can see this is clearly a photo of a waterfall, right? It's that ability to work with not what we know, but what we don't know. That is my definition of intelligence. Because
Okay.
I think it gets a little confusing because at least in the early schooling era, they're not really teaching you intelligence. They're teaching you knowledge. The teacher will just give you a fact and you memorize that fact, and they'll give you a test and you repeat back the fact. And that is the metric that a lot of people are using for large language models.
Yeah.
They're doing like bullshit like, oh, can it do the SATs? Can it do the bar exam? Like, of course it can do the bar exam. It's a database of all the answers. It can just regurgitate the answers. Now, my definition of intelligence would be, okay, what happens when we put things that, like we ask it to do things that aren't in its database, which is admittedly very hard for large language models because, well, they have all of human knowledge pretty much in there. They have like every book, every movie, every web page. So it's very hard to find a task where the AI cannot A, just use basic pattern matching, and B, it isn't in their data set. And this is where I say AI is not in any any definition of the word intelligent. And the way I would assess this is by product. If we ask the AI to do something that it already has in its database, it's very easily going to be able to do it because it already knows the answer. But then we have a lot of problems. We as humans have a lot of unanswered questions. We have mathematical problems that have not yet been solved. We have incomplete scientific theories. Now, I like to go to Einstein for this example because Einstein lived before computers. In his day, he could read as many books as he could read. He couldn't Google things. He couldn't control F through a book. He would have to read a book or a scientific paper. And back then, I think they were published in like actual physical journals. So he would have had to gone and got a scientific journal and read through it to learn a little bit about a thing. And with as little, I'm not going to say Einstein wasn't knowledgeable, but with as little
Yeah.
knowledge as he had access to, he was able to create theories like special and general relativity, which revolutionized physics.
Hmm.
Now, in physics classes today, we work with a lot of his theories, and your average, not very bright college student can work with Einstein's theories because we already have the complete picture. He's already come up with them. He's already given us the answers, and we can now work with them. But what made Einstein so amazing is he did not have the answers. He came up with them initially. So, kind of my point there would be, okay, so Einstein could come up with this amazing theory with very, very limited access to information. We have these machines that have, I don't even know how much, trillions on trillions on trillions on trillions of data points. Like every book, every scientific paper, absolutely everything is in their knowledge database. But like, what have they come up with? If I
Yeah.
ask it for a theory that unifies classical physics and quantum physics, it just shits out some existing theories that someone else came up with. If it had any intelligence at all, with the sheer amount of knowledge it has access to and the sheer amount of computing power it has access to, I would expect it would be able to complete at least one of those theories. Like the fact that it just has so much knowledge, yet seems to
Yeah.
have done nothing novel whatsoever, uh,
Yeah.
in my opinion, says that not only does it lack intelligence, it isn't intelligent at all.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. This is where I wanted to get to. So I think a couple of times you've made this like horrible error, and this is why it's actually a risk to regular people. So when we were talking about computer science and programming, you used yourself as an example of being able to pivot. You have been on the front page of Wired. You you're an exceptional person. Malware analysts are also exceptional people within computer science and within security. So very few people in security can do malware analysis. So you're already exceptional and then exceptional within that group. And then you just defined intelligence, giving the example of Einstein. Einstein is one of the smartest people, arguably the smartest person. I would argue Newton. But anyway, one of the smartest people in the entire world that's ever existed. If you put the bar there, I agree with you. And I also want to just grant you the overall point of like, where are the novel discoveries? Here's my problem with this, Marcus. Like, that is not the bar that matters. The bar that matters is what's going to change society. The bar that matters is taking normal people's level of intelligence, getting above that bar. So you have, John Smith, working at some job. Again, I go down the list, writing an essay about the book that you read, reading and answering emails, organizing a conference. Hundreds of millions of people are being paid a full living salary to do these jobs not very well. That level of intelligence, which I think you and I can agree, like it's not that great. And they are not Einstein. They are not writing malware. The standard here is extremely low. The amount of critical thinking needed for that is extremely low. So what I'm talking about is an AI that can replace that level of intelligence. And I just think the definition of inventing net new things is an unbelievably high like bar for intelligence. To me, it has to be, can you be hit with regular everyday problems, and can you solve them using your knowledge of how the world works? Because just one last thing to say here, every single one of those mundane tasks that I just gave, they're not actually just knowledge lookup. They actually require critical thinking for every single one of them, because the email is not the same. The report that they're going to write is not the same. Each one of those, even though it's relatively simple for a human, it's impossible for pre-human technology or pre-AI technology that wasn't human. So it's, in my mind, it's 100% intelligence because it can't be automated.
I think that's an entirely different argument. Well, there's almost two or three separate arguments going on here. There's
Okay,
first, like, is it enough to replace the average worker? Which you're sort of extrapolating and saying that is a definition of intelligence. But I would argue the average worker is not using their intelligence. They're working primarily with knowledge. Like, if we were to take your average, like, John Smith office worker and apply them to a task that was novel and did require intelligence, they would probably be able to do that because they have intelligence that is going to waste in that job. Like, they're being made to do essentially busy work, which is primarily knowledge based, not intelligence based. Now, I think what the kind of the miscommunication or the misunderstanding here is trying to attribute what requires intelligence for a human as intelligence for a large language model, because these large language models are doing pattern matching. While sure, every email isn't the same, it's not thinking about the differences between emails. It simply just has a big database of here's all the different conversations, and every conversation that has pretty much ever occurred, like almost every single conversation I've ever had in my life is a slight variation of a conversation that has already been had by someone else. Like,
sure.
there is nothing novel going on. So I would argue that that is not a sign of AI intelligence. It is a sign that you can almost emulate a not fully applied intelligence with a very advanced pattern matching algorithm. And the reason
Can
why
I
I
jump
use
in? Can I jump
sure.
in real quick? Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I want to give you an example here. Couples therapy. So a couples therapist studies for whatever, they have a master's degree or a PhD, whatever they have. And a couple comes to them and says, you know, we're about to break up our marriage because of so and so problem. And they help them for 2 3 years, listening to all their different problems. And then they're coaching them through all the psychology, the sociology, all the trauma stuff, whatever they're talking to them about, cognitive behavioral therapy, all this stuff. Marcus, all that stuff is just knowledge. It's just knowledge. And guess what? That conversation with this couple is kind of just like the other conversation with the other couple. Like, there's not really anything net new. Can we really argue that what that marriage therapist is doing isn't requiring intelligence? Of course it does. Of course it does. And what I'm arguing is all this knowledge work, it does to a lesser degree, of course, and to a lesser degree than my friend who's a cardiologist, because those are like really difficult things. But when you were trying to plan a 4-day trip to Switzerland with a different type of family, and one has different food needs, and the weather is also different in Switzerland, it is a net new problem each time, even though the problem specifics look different than previous versions.
I would say it's a net new problem to a specific human, but not humanity as a whole. Because
But that
I
doesn't
think,
matter
like,
because that's what we solve every day. It doesn't matter what's new to humanity overall. Day to day, we're being hit with regular everyday problems, and that's the work that we have to do. We can't leverage all of humanity for that. We have to solve it ourselves.
well, the I guess the problem is, are you trying to argue that AI is intelligent, or are you trying to argue that it could do the average, or like any of the jobs that you've given? Because my argument
I'm
would
arguing
be,
both.
okay, so I would agree with you that, yeah, a lot of therapy is just pattern matching. There are I would use like an example like attachment theory. There's four different types of attachment style, and everyone fits into one of those four groups. And there's some very clearly defined rules of what tends to cause someone to become a certain attachment style, but every single situation is going to be slightly different. But all of those situations map to a single rule that then maps to your specific attachment style. So essentially, what a therapist is doing there is they're listening to you and they're trying to pick out like, okay, what are their traumas? Like, how did their parents teach them? And then they're
Yes.
mapping that just to a rule. Now, as a human, that requires a lot more intelligence than it would require for a large language model because the large language model has way more examples to go on. So what you're basically taking is uh, almost it's like a kind of hand in hand relationship. You can, to an extent, replace intelligence with knowledge and knowledge with intelligence. And with the large language model, you have infinitely more knowledge, which means it needs infinitely less intelligence to replace whatever job you want to say it's going to replace. But my argument is that's not a sign of AI intelligence. That is a sign of the AI's knowledge. I think in order to even demonstrate a small amount of intelligence, the bar should be a lot higher than for a human. And that's the reason why I went with the Einstein example, because sure, a lot of people consider Einstein to be the smartest human on Earth, but he was working with a very, very small amount of information, like a very small amount of knowledge and a very small amount of data compared to an AI. So knowledge sort of acts as this sort of amplifier for intelligence. So if Einstein, with his amazing intelligence but very limited access to data, could accomplish such amazing feats, why can something with trillions and trillions and trillions of data points and books not really accomplish more than your average Joe who's not even fully applying all the intelligence they have? They're just doing
Yeah.
data entry or pattern matching. So my argument there is I'm not saying that current generation large language models might not be able to replace certain roles. I'm saying it is not evidence that they are intelligent. It is intelligent, it's evidence that their level of knowledge can act in place of intelligence. And this becomes important because there is a ceiling, there is a cap where you can't just shove in more and more knowledge and it just gets more and more intelligent. Or, sorry, it's not getting intelligent, it's able to emulate intelligence more and more. At some point, you
Hmm.
hit a ceiling. And we've already hit that ceiling because we have these machines that have all of this, like all of science in their database, and they can't do shit. Like they cannot
Yeah. Yeah.
complete a
So
single scientific theory.
yeah, no, I love this. First of all, I just want to say I love this line that you were on. This is actually not being talked about anywhere. Well, I want to say in all the places that I'm looking, and I'm looking a lot of different places. I love this point that you just made about how more and more knowledge is a cheat code to intelligence. It requires less intelligence. I don't think it matters, and and here's why. So first of all, there's um there's a bunch of post training stuff that gets done, and I'm not an expert on post training, but there's a bunch of stuff that you do with these models afterwards, and I believe that we are making massive inroads on that. What I call tricks. Basically tricking AI as a system overall to understand how to make these jumps. In other words, I think it is possible to teach AI how to go from Newtonian physics to Einsteinian theories. And I think it's possible to teach it to generalize to be able to do that. And there's already some evidence of this working. I had a thing in the show recently. Um, Basically, researchers had been working on this one problem with bacteriophages, which are basically viruses that propagate and try to take over bacteria. And so they'd been struggling with this for like over a decade, or maybe two decades. The absolute pinnacle researchers in this particular thing, they gave it to this new Google model, which is specifically designed to do exactly what you're talking about, Marcus, to actually find net new things. And it came back and said, here's my hypothesis for why this is happening. They looked at it and they said, holy crap, that is the answer. It's a net new answer. They went and tested it. It was 100% confirmed. And there's a bunch of more examples of this. There's companies that are doing this, basically harvesting like research that dormant research, raw research, and coming up with net new hypotheses. So I think that's just a matter of like, we just haven't done the work of the scaffolding of teaching the AI how to make jumps, right? Because it, like you said, it's been so easy to just pull from the knowledge. But I think this is a training step that we could do. And this is an empirical thing. Like it'll either work or it doesn't. And I can send you over the stuff. But um, the bigger point here for me is that this is why this matters to me. is because of humans. So if we go back to the point of like, don't worry about AI, if I could, summarize your thing about that, saying there's always going to be a place for humans. This thing is not a big deal. I think you've even called it like autocorrect. No, autocomplete. Right? You call it autocomplete. And I'm like, no, it is not autocomplete. It's actually doing this work. My point to you, Marcus, is my friend's cardiology practice is nothing but pattern matching. Okay, most high level work is just pattern matching. This couples therapist, they are also doing pattern matching. And if you look at the average job, they are also doing pattern matching. Like, okay, we're taking emails, we're writing a report. You can reduce all this work that hundreds of millions of people are doing. You could reduce that to pattern matching if you want. But we're talking about hundreds of millions of jobs, right? So if AI could do that work, then it still has the impact that I'm concerned about, whatever we want to call it.
I don't disagree, but then the question is, like, why hasn't it? Are we not there yet? Are
It's
we
because it's
waiting
just now
on?
getting started. It's just now getting started. Like the tech is just now getting to the companies. These companies don't even know what AI is. They don't know what it isn't. It takes time to spin it up. Like we see the experiment starting. We see thousands of companies trying to adopt it, but they're trying to figure out what it is at the same time that they're trying to adopt it. So it's just a matter of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, in my opinion. And it's already happening. We already have evidence that it's happening. It's just a matter of time.
I'm not sure I agree because, like, companies have, as you said, they've been in a rush to roll out AI. But then the question is, like, if it is so close to being able to replace the average knowledge worker, why aren't we seeing any massive replacement? Why aren't we seeing any change in the productivity of companies? Because, like, we have objective metrics for those things. And one sort of tangent I'd want to go on here is a lot of industries aren't finite. Like if you think of something like, say, farming, there's only so much food we need. If we were able to automate all of farming, sure, farmers could go away. We don't, there's no value to, hey, let's reallocate the farmers to figuring out how to make even more food. Like once we've got enough food to feed everyone, we're good. But then you have industries which is also overlap with the industries that are most invested in AI and are most trying to replace workers with AI, like tech. Now, tech is not a finite industry. There is infinite software you can write. There are infinite
Yeah,
feature improvements. There's infinite patches. Now, I guess the example I'd give is Microsoft is not a search engine company, but they felt the need to come out with a search engine. Google is not an operating system company, but they felt the need to come out with an operating system. Why? Because the more products you make, the more market share you can capture, and the more you can compete in the global market. So, from a tech company perspective, let's say I can right now replace all of my software engineers with AI. The illogical thing to do would be to lay off all my engineers and do the same thing that I'm already doing, but with AI, because all of the companies that are smart are just going to do more. They're going to just start breaking into all the other industries that all their competitors are in, and they're going to dominate every space. So the logical path, if AI could replace employees, would not be laying off your employees. It would be to just expand. It's to have your employees do more and more things, do more and more products, and capture more and more market share. Now, if that was happening, we would see an increase in GDP because GDP is the total value of all of the goods and products produced within the country. Yet
yep,
we're not seeing any change in GDP. We're not seeing any change in productivity. All of these companies who are claiming that they're going to replace all their engineers with AI, we've not seen any change in anything.
yeah,
So firstly, I wouldn't also, especially in tech, I would not be worried about employees being just replaced because, well, firstly, AI doesn't fully replace an employee. It accelerates their productivity. So doing the same amount of productivity but with less employees is far less desirable than keeping your employees and just doing more. But we've not really seen either. We haven't seen employees being replaced with AI, and we haven't seen this massive explosion in productivity from tech companies. In fact,
yeah,
they're doing the straight opposite. They're laying off their employees to focus on AI. They're like, oh, we don't even have enough money to do whatever it was, like whatever products Google has binned, they're like binning half of their products and services to go and focus on AI. Whereas if AI was actually capable of what they say it's capable of, they would be going in the straight opposite direction. They'd be making a gaming console. They'd be making a desktop operating system better. They would be cornering like every single market, and they're not. They're actually cutting down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting point. I hear you. I think the reason it's not affecting GDP yet is because it's not rolled out. I mean, this is just starting. Like last year, we weren't even talking about agents yet, which is kind of like the way we try to get into all this automation. And now agents are just now starting to get serious. My estimate for this has always been uh, before 29. So I think this is going to be like a 2027 thing when this AGI worker replacement technology is good enough to actually start replacing workers. And it could be way sooner than that. It could be this year. It could be whenever. Um, that it's not until that thing gets rolled out and it starts getting implemented by the thousands by many different companies that we're actually going to see a GDP bump. So I would anticipate that being in like 28, 29, 30, and into the 30s, because that's just a slow, like massive ramp up. um, and the other thing, I can't remember your other point. What was the other point that you made about other than the GDP?
That it would make sense to
Oh
not
yes.
lay off employees, but to increase productivity.
Yeah. So the difference there, the reason that doesn't work is because an employee might cost, like, let's just call it $200,000 with benefits. But for depending on the level, that could be three or $400,000. Well, their entire contract with the AI company might be $200,000. If they can spin up 40,000 of these employees for $200,000 instead of the 500 human employees, then I think they would start with getting rid of the previous ones. Obviously, they should do a slow thing, but I think the natural thing they're going to do, just based on what the CFO says, is yeah, we have these 500 people making 400 grand or 300 grand. Yeah, we need to phase them out, keep the top 1%, keep the top 10%, and they're going to be the ones, helping us move into other areas. But all net new actual software engineers are going to be this other thing, which we're already paying for the subscription. Which, so it's like no marginal, or yeah, the marginal cost is virtually zero to add new software engineers.
But I think that rests on the assumption that the AI agent can wholly replace an engineer, which is, as I said, is something I don't believe will ever happen. I think what we will see is maybe, I'm not even convinced of this yet, but I think maybe we will see these AI models get to the point where they can actually accelerate the productivity of a software engineer. But at the end of the day, there is always going to be a human on the end. It's just an abstraction. It's like uh, how when we used to write things in machine code, it was super slow scrolling ones and zeros on a punch card. And then we made assembly language and that made things a bit more productive. And then we made C and then we made Python. And now you can write whole software suites with these like point and click applications. But at the end of the day, there's always a human on the end of that. It is just like an abstraction and an acceleration of a human employee. Whereas I think the assumption you're working from here is that we get to a point where we can just wholly replace the human, which, for the same reason I said AI is not intelligent, I don't think we can do because it will always lack that ability to fill in the gaps, to come up with answers when not all the pieces are there. Like, I don't know how much you've done software engineering, but a lot of it is like the client doesn't even know what they want. Like, how do you prompt ChatGPT to build code when the client isn't even sure what it is they want to build? And that's always been a large part of software engineering. It's not the writing code, which admittedly it's iffy, but you can to an extent do with large language models. It's the making the design decisions. It's like, what kind of server infrastructure do you want? How do you want the applications to talk to each other? And those are not decisions that an agent can make. They're decisions that need to be made by a human. And the
Yeah,
human
but
making the decisions doesn't even know what decisions they want to make.
yeah, but so check this out. Um, I want to use your previous points kind of to counter that argument. Making those server choices and making those customer choices, those conversations are exactly the same as the marriage therapist. Okay, they're basing that on good fundamental principles of building good applications with servers and applications and network connectivity and authentication and security and privacy and all these different things. These are fundamental rules. These are like written down, and you could debate them or whatever. But fundamentally, AI is going to be doing the same exact thing that they're doing for like writing emails and sending emails and summarizing documents. Fundamentally, we're not making a Einsteinian jump here. We're talking about teaching an AI what a fundamental building of an application infrastructure looks like and what good software engineering looks like. That is a knowledge base. So the fact that we haven't done that yet and we're still stuck in this vibe coding land, that's because vibe coding started about 48 seconds ago in AI time, right? It started just now. So the vibe coding or the AIs are not good at doing the software engineering piece yet, but it is the same. It's not any harder than the cardiologist, which is also a knowledge base, or the marriage therapist, which is also a knowledge base. It's just a matter of time before this stuff becomes more capable. Now, in terms of like, will there always be a human in the loop? I mean, I think the higher level you go, the more advanced you go, like I think there's going to be humans in the loop over agent farms that are doing things, and the human's going to be applying what I believe to be the most irreplaceable thing, which is like taste and judgment and like preference, because AIs are not alive; they don't have their own opinions, and so I think that's going to be the kind of like spiritual shaping these things are going to be putting into these agent farms. But in terms of execution of writing the code and making sure it's on a good infrastructure that's secure, that to me is all knowledge-based stuff.
I would actually push back and say that I completely disagree because, unlike with the past examples you've given me, tech moves insanely fast. Like, there's probably been 50 new database frameworks that have come out since I started programming. And back in the day, it would be bung everything into an SQL database. And that was horrible for the majority of applications. And then we started coming out with all these new types of databases. We came out with like NoSQL and all of these unstructured, query-based. I don't even want. I just want to call it like a data bin.
Yeah,
Then we had like AWS buckets, and then we're constantly inventing new technologies. And the problem there is twofold. The first is there is no set of rules because we're inventing new technologies at a rate in which it's basically it is opinions, it's decisions. There's no hard and fast rule of if this then that for database or server design, and also unlike with, say, the marriage therapist, almost everything that has ever happened to you has happened to someone else. Like a lot of people like to believe that their experience is like unique and no one else has lived their life and no one else has their problems.
yeah,
But in reality, your average human is like 100 other people have been through the same stuff that they have been through. Whereas with technology, we're trying to build new applications. We're trying to build stuff that hasn't already been built. So if we would say just confined within only the software that already exists, sure, you could just use rules, but then what would be the value of that? Like, what is the value of, hey, we can just build software we already have? Like, oh, I can build a HTTP server. Why don't I just download Apache or Nginx? So that is a problem. And then the second thing is, in order for the large language models to actually even emulate making those decisions, they need knowledge of those frameworks, which means they have to be trained on that data. So someone has to go and they have to create massive amounts of data to feed into the large language model because it's almost like, I'd call it like a lossy compression algorithm. You can't just put like a really good paper on database design into a large language model, and now your large language model is really good at database design. You need like thousands, millions of data points in order for it to even be mediocre at that decision making. So now we're going to have a lag where like a new technology will come out, and as a human with like actual intelligence, but a lack of knowledge because this technology is new and I'm not an expert in it, I can read the documentation and I can understand it. I can fill in the missing pieces. I can make decisions about how that might pertain to my software. But the large language model now, it doesn't have any intelligence to begin with, and it doesn't have the knowledge because it's not being put out there on the internet yet for it to be trained on. So now we just have this massive lag where an actual human developer is going to be better than the AI because they're going to know more and they're going to be able to work with newer technologies better. So I would really push back on that, especially with software engineering, because a lot of fields are very static. It's like things haven't changed in like decades or millennia. Whereas technology, like in the time we've been recording this video, there's probably like 50 new technologies I'm going to have to go and learn. So
Yeah,
I would
no, I hear
disagree.
you. I hear you there. I hear you there. Let me respond to that. So essentially, who do you think is going to be better at learning a new tech? I think you're incorrect about you need to go and get thousands or millions of examples. What people are currently doing in state of the art of building this stuff now, and I'm pretty sure you and I could just test this offline afterwards. We could potentially make like a fake language, a fake new programming language, also using AI, and then say rewrite this working application in this new application in this new programming language, and you give it a full programming language spec, and it could just port automatically over. So I think you're making my point for me. So if you think about the concept of creating a net new application, if going back to human psychology and going back to philosophical principles, think about this. There are only so many net new things that you can make. And they're going to be oriented, they're going to have the shape, the pothole shape of human problems. So like you're not going to make something up that is net new to a computer that the AI has never heard of before. You're going to make things like, oh, it's going to be a game. Oh, it's going to be an application where I submit this and get this back. And when you show it a new programming language, it's not going to be like, holy crap, I've never seen that before. You've blown my mind. It's going to be like, are you kidding me? I know all programming languages and I see what you've done here with the spec. Okay, cool. Yeah, I could use that. So if there are 25 new programming paradigms and programming languages and programming specs that come out while we're doing this, the advantage of these new software engineers things, they're parsing those all the time. That's just part of the agent infrastructure to constantly be re-ingesting these new languages. And here's the crazy part. If it hadn't done that, then when you say, just, I want you to program in, Booga Booga or whatever it is, it's like, I don't know what that is. Hold on, give me a second. Okay, I just consumed everything anyone's ever said about it because I live crawled the internet about it. I read all the forums. I read the entire programming spec. I brought that in. That's now part of my knowledge. Would you like me to rewrite this in Booga Booga?
I don't agree for multiple reasons. The first is that uh, I think we're talking more about I don't know what actually is the correct term for it, but you have two functionalities to a large language model. You have the actual training database where they've ingested the data, they've run it through their training system, they've done their human like reinforcement learning on the data, and that's how you get the AI being able to do something. Now, on top of that, it can search the internet, it can grab some new data, and then based on its existing knowledge base, it can, to an extent, parse that data. But I would argue that firstly, like even something as simple as a new programming language would not be something that it could just go out, fetch the spec, and then using its existing database, be able to write in that language. I think it would have to be not just retrained, but also it would have to go through the human reinforcement learning process. And then my second point is I've actually done this. Not even with a new programming language, but there's a niche programming language that I have to use quite a lot. And for the life of me, I cannot get any large language model to write functional code in that language because there's just not enough data points about it. I
Yeah,
can go onto a forum, I can grab a script and it'll work. But whenever I ask the large language model to make me something in that language, it just falls flat on its face. Like it cannot do it. So, like, based on my experience, and we're talking something as simple as a programming language, which can be one-to-one mapped to an existing programming language. When we talk about like brand new database frameworks, it's not like, oh, this is just SQL, but the
yeah.
words are different. Like, this is an entirely new framework with entirely new design decisions and things to comprehend. And if I can't even get these large language models to write me a language where it literally is a one-to-one map of existing languages, I can't imagine it being able to just on the fly consume, say, like a documentation or a press release about a new technology and then be able to immediately work with that technology.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree it's not possible now because I've actually tried this as well. I mean, there's also just languages that a given model is better with, and everyone kind of knows that. So it's not as simple as just go grab the spec for the language and now it's suddenly better because of the previous point that you made. But this is the type of thing that billions of dollars are being spent on, like Cursor and, well, I guess all the Pinnacle models are obviously working on this. But the kind of the biggest challenge that everyone's trying to solve right now is how to get that context into the current working model. And that is accelerating at like a crazy amount. I don't think it requires retraining. I think fine tuning is largely kind of blown up and just not a great thing. Um, I expect that to be very possible very soon. And I'm not saying like an entire new database structure, entirely new programming language. But it takes time for a human to learn a programming language as well. It's not like the human just go reads the spec and now they can suddenly do it. That's a thing that also takes a human years to learn. I think AIs are going to be way faster at doing that. And I think that'll speed up pretty dramatically over the next, I don't know, who knows how fast, 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I think our core disagreement is, which is basically I think in order to be able to do that, you need actual functional intelligence, which I do not believe a machine can ever have. So I think we can only keep building these models that they emulate intelligence on specific tasks. But I actually think it's going to take longer to build those models for these new technologies than it is for a bunch of humans to just learn about the tech. So I think we're actually just gonna hit a wall where a lot of people are thinking that these models are just gonna get more and more advanced, more and more intelligent, and at some point they will reach human level intelligence. Whereas my personal belief is that we have already capped out, and we're now at the stage of we will just build submodels that can do this specific task. So now you're essentially now your question is, can I learn a new framework or a new language or a new technology, then understand it enough to build the submodel, make sure it actually works functionally faster than someone could just learn it and write code in it? And I don't see any way in which, without getting to a model that has actual human level intelligence, not knowledge, actual intelligence, we would ever get to the point where it can learn that quickly without retraining.
Well, keep in mind, it only has to do it once, right? Because then it just becomes like an MCP that somebody can call so the whole world can use it, right? So I think that there's just the scale of the benefit of doing it this way is extraordinary. The other thing is like, this is not even talk about like actual ASI, which I consider to be like true general intelligence, which I'm still a bit agnostic on. I would say I'm like 90% that it gets there eventually, but I have no idea when. But more importantly, like I tend to like listen when somebody like Karpathy or Ilya or people like this, people who are like knee deep into this and are the true experts on what the frontier looks like. Plus, a lot of the people that I follow actually at the labs who are not like the marketing people, not the CEO, but the actual researchers talking about how fast they're making these jumps. Um, I think this whole thing of like learn a new framework for programming is going to be relatively small in the difficulty category. Um, but I do hear your main point. I would say that this whole thing we've been talking about here is not even my main point. My main point is that what I care about is the impact to humans, and that if cardiologists and marriage therapists and really advanced, like highly trained people are largely doing rote knowledge and having an interaction about rote knowledge, that could be defined, that could be applied to software engineering. Okay. What if we just didn't start using brand new tech all the time to build new tech? So let's say, for example, we actually locked in on TypeScript and a certain backend technology and a certain database and a certain server structure. And then the AI got really, really good at that. And then the whole goal became, let's maximize GDP for the planet or whatever it is. That that would potentially make a software engineer extremely an AI-based software engineer way more productive and way lower marginal cost than hiring a human, right? There's no rule that says we must adopt new technologies all the time as they come out the following day, even though that is like the way humans do it. But I just don't think we can look at the top tier of someone like a Marcus, someone like myself, someone like a malware engineer, someone like, a cardiologist or whatever, and say, there's parts of their job that they're going to be able to pivot because they're exceptional. There's parts of their job and AI might not be able to do. I'm worried about the other 99% who are not doing anything extraordinarily exceptional. All those examples that I gave of like regular tasks, that's what most people are being paid money to do. And that's what AI can already do. It just hasn't been like systematized and like brought into companies where it's actually running as an engine where they could start laying everyone off and hiring more of those things. So if you could replace doctors like this, if you could replace, you know, marriage counselors, then it's going to hit knowledge work. It's going to hit it really bad.
Um, I mean, I guess it's a big if, but if it could, then sure, yeah. But then there's two points I would make. The first is, does it all happen at once? Does it happen so fast that all of these people are just out of work? Um, and two, is there like, do we not find a way to deal with that? Um, I would argue that there's always going to be critical thinking work in any role that cannot be automated with large language models. So there is always going to be a place for someone who has the knowledge of that domain and the critical thinking. I see this a lot in security, actually. We try and secure medical systems. It's like, I don't know shit about medical systems. I can be like, oh, let's fire a wallet off from the internet. And it's like, oh, no, that person's dead now. It needed to talk to the cloud to
Right.
set their heartbeat pace or some shit. So then we have medical professionals come in and they understand these technologies, they understand the patient, and they understand the needs of the patient, and they communicate them to us, and then we do the security. And I think there's always going to be an equivalent of that for anything you can do with AI. There is always going to be a need for someone who has the same knowledge as the AI, but also the critical thinking, the intelligence to actually work out the problems. So it might be we just everyone becomes project managers. Like instead of having humans doing like data entry and busy work, everyone becomes a project manager, and the AI is now the low level employee. Now, personally, I would love if that was possible. If we could take the entire working class and move everyone up a level and have all those people make good salaries, like project manager salaries, and then have the AI do all the grunt work that no one wants to do. I think that would be amazing, but I also
Yeah.
don't think it's realistic. I don't think we are actually going to get to the point where it can even do enough to get us to that level.
Don't you think the AIs are going to be okay? If the AI could do cardiologist work, don't you think it could be a better project manager?
Nope.
Isn't project management, isn't all the things that you just described, that is knowledge. That thing of like, well, we didn't know how to secure it because it's a medical thing. That medical thing is knowledge that is captured somewhere. Like this is all just a matter of orchestration. I mean, you could feed all this to a project manager and it would know, hey, Marcus, don't like set up that firewall rule because so and so is going to die. Like this is not net new stuff. This goes back to your previous point of like, well, now you're just calling up knowledge. Yeah, that's the whole game. The whole game is calling up knowledge.
Well, I meant that example not as an example of something AI couldn't do, but as an example of when we need to bring in people with one skill set to another. And the same would be true for the skill set essentially just being intelligence, like critical thinking. The parts that are missing from AI, there would exist that in every field, and you can't take someone who has like that. What I was trying to get at is you can't take someone who has the intelligence and the knowledge, sorry, the intelligence and the critical thinking, but not the knowledge, and then give them the knowledge of the AI and make it whole, because that person now has no ability to fact check the AI. They have no ability to work with that information because they don't know if it's true or not. They just know what this model is telling them, which is why I say, like with the medical professionals, I don't know about how medical devices work. I could ask ChatGPT, it's going to give me a horrible answer and I'm going to end up killing someone. So we need someone who understands, who has both the knowledge in the medical field and the critical thinking and intelligence. So my argument is that these large language models will always be able to replace the knowledge. They will always be able to an extent, substitute knowledge, but they can never do the critical thinking. So you'll always need a human for that. And it can't just be any human. It's going to have to be someone who also has some of the knowledge to actually work with the model.
Yeah, so here's what I think the fundamental issue is. That you gave an example of like when AI is using its knowledge and its vast knowledge, it's not actually being intelligent. Well, guess what? When you bring over Sarah Meyer to be the medical expert to help us not do the wrong firewall rule, she is not being Einstein right then. She's just calling on her knowledge. She is also not invoking her massive creativity and her massive critical thinking. She's calling a database inside her own brain. That database can be in the context that is given when this AI tries to write the firewall rule. When the AI goes to consider writing the firewall rule, it will pull from its knowledge, which includes Sarah Meyer's knowledge, which is you don't put firewall rules for egress traffic inside of medical, high criticality systems because you might block the heartbeat monitor. That was not critical thinking that Sarah did. She called on her knowledge. So the same
I would
exact thing.
disagree there
How is that? How is
because
that?
because essentially when you're trying to bridge these two different fields, like we're trying to secure a medical system that's taking security and medical systems, there's a gap there. There is a gap where, let's say we have Sarah who knows like a lot about medical systems, and then there's me who knows a lot about cybersecurity. Well, there needs to be communication, there needs to be thought, there needs to be problem solving. And that is where the intelligence comes in. If we just sit there with our collective knowledge and we sit in a room together and we're like, I'm knowledgeable and you're knowledgeable, nothing's going to happen. We have to
Well,
discuss and we have to reason and we have to think. And that is the part that large language models cannot do. They cannot reason, they cannot think. They just have the knowledge. Now you need the intelligence to apply the knowledge, and that is where we come in.
so let me, yeah, I love this example, by the way. This is great. So imagine you're in the room with Sarah, and again, we're going back to the fact that intelligence is needed when you don't have the knowledge, right? So watch this. You're sitting in the room with all the knowledge about cybersecurity. She's sitting in the room with all the knowledge about medical systems, and you're having a conversation. It turns out you're just exchanging knowledge because the fact of what should be done is already known, right?
I
We,
disagree. You're making a situation where like whatever it is we're trying to solve, there is already a known solution. Whereas if that was the case, then obviously security would be solved, right? Like if there was a known solution to every problem, why we wouldn't have jobs. I actually don't know if you work in cybersecurity still,
well,
but
so check this out. That kind of is the case, though, isn't it, Marcus? Doesn't has anyone come up with an answer? Like, have you coming up with an answer for a customer where it hadn't been talked about? Like, basically, doing that solution hadn't been talked about a million times throughout the history of
yes,
cybersecurity.
yes, I personally have. But a lot of time it isn't just like it's kind of hard to explain in a way that the non-security viewers will easily grasp. But a lot of security is known solutions. They're just not good solutions. Like, let's say password theft. Your password gets stolen. What's the everyone's solution to that? Two-factor authentication. You send an SMS to their phone. Um, why doesn't everything have two-factor authentication? Well, because there's problems with that. Okay, let's say we choose phone-based two-factor authentication. What if I lose my phone?
Sure.
Now I have to go down to IT and I have to get my password reset and I'm losing productivity. And IT has to somehow verify my identity and know that I'm not a scammer pretending to be me. So there's a huge productivity loss there. And then what happens when I pick up my phone to get my 2FA code and I see there's a notification from my girlfriend? So I start talking to my girlfriend and we've just now lost a bunch of productivity. And then you amplify that over an entire office space and to whatever the cost of password theft was and being hacked was, you've probably lost more in productivity loss. So while we have existing solutions, we actually don't have good solutions. Everything is just trying to get uh, the best possible idea for our specific scenario, which is really what cybersecurity is about. And that is the critical thinking. That's the intelligence. An AI can just go, oh, your passwords are being stolen. Use 2FA. Okay, what
Yeah,
2FA?
yeah,
How do I
but
handle
that's
password reset?
but that's not what an AI is doing. Okay, so modern AIs, like, because I do this with risk assessment all the time. I do, yeah. To answer your question, I'm doing this all the time for actual customers. When you give the thing proper context, So if you give it the thing that, look, 2FA doesn't work in this situation because of this, you don't even have to give it that. You could just say, this situation exists. This situation exists. We have this complexity over here. We have this complexity over here. What do you think the security control should be? It will say things like, well, based on your current state of your cloud infrastructure, and based on the fact that you do business in France, and based on the fact that 2FA won't work for this, and you can't actually do SMS because whatever, it's too easy to do spoofing of cell phones. So we're going to rule that one out, especially in this scenario because of this jurisdiction, whatever. And you start giving it, the more context you give it, the more it's going to navigate all those special situations just the way that you would or that I would. My argument to you is that when you look at an average pen test report, and again, we can't use me or you or some other person who's been doing this forever as the example, because yeah, maybe we can come up with a novel thing that's never been thought of before. But if you go take all the pen test reports produced last week and we go step by step through them, what kind of novelty is in there? What kind of new solutions are being proposed? Aren't they mostly saying, this thing was wide open? You've got a config problem here. That config should not be in that way. Oh, by the way, you should review your changes before you actually publish them. Oh, by the way, you have, your credentials are open. Like it's going to be very common stuff. Like you've got to patch this stuff. You've got to patch.
But who's giving it the context?
The point is, people are being paid to do this work. They don't have to give any context. They can just give the list of vulnerabilities. They can give the list of vulnerabilities. They can say, I was able to get in through this. You have to patch that system because it's critical. And the people read it and they're like, oh yeah, it's a critical system. This is what my team has been telling me for 14 years. Everything in this report, my team has already told me a million times. I just needed to get this report because now I can justify the security spend. Like how much of novel, quote unquote, novel things that very highly paid people are being paid for is actually exactly the thing that you described before, which is it's very much known things, just applied in a specific way for a specific customer. It's not always the same. It's non-deterministic because it's a particular tester doing it, but the output looks remarkably similar. They're almost identical to the output of another pen tester doing the same exact thing.
Yeah, but now we're switching from the reports to the decision making, because earlier you said about the context, like, okay, the company's operating in this jurisdiction, blah, 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 blah. But who is giving it that context? Like, surely there has to be a person who is gathering and giving the model that context.
Sure. The agent, an agent is crawling all the docs. It's having chat interviews with people. It's doing voice calls and interviewing people. Like this is all just like common stakes for like something an AI could do. It could do an interview. It could talk to you and extract information. It could read an entire wiki. It could read every doc on Google Docs and Confluence. Like it can go and gather that context.
You see, I don't think it can. Like, I don't think it has the capability or the intelligence to gather that kind of context. I think maybe there is an argument that in the future it could, but given any current generation model I have used, we're not even close to being able to gather the context. We can't even answer the questions. Like I've had multiple times where I've asked the AI stuff, and because it's been trained on all of the past knowledge, which, as I've mentioned, is constantly changing, it'll be like, oh, we should do password rotation. And then like, we've disproven password rotation like 20 years ago. Like, why are you suggesting this?
Yeah.
And so we're right now we're still running into the problem of, oh, the best practices have changed in the last 5 years, maybe it's even the last 1 year, and the model hasn't even updated to account for that. And now you're saying we could have the model that can barely even keep up with the current state of the world, now actually like interviewing people and like profiling my company and like the local laws and the documentations. And I think it may be in 10, 20 years is something that AI could do, but there is no current generation model I've seen that even comes close to being
Well,
able to do that.
but it's not a model though, Marcus. It's like it's not like O3 or some model has capabilities like that. It's more like we hired this, I don't know, Securus. This Securus company comes out and it's like our model, Securus, is the smartest model ever. And it will do a security assessment for you. when you give the thing to Securus, it's actually smoke and mirrors. It's actually a whole bunch of agents sitting behind it. So it's really this really smart orchestrator in the front. It has a million different gatherers that go and answer questions that haven't been talked about. So you hand this thing, it's like, hey, we're building this, whatever it is, this special new application. And the top level agent is like, I have no idea what that is. Let me go crawl all the documentation. So it's all smoke and mirrors orchestration of multiple things going together. It's like, hey, what about this application? Well, it's being developed by so-and-so team. Okay, who's on that team? Okay, here's the list of people. Okay, set up meetings and go talk to them. Or send them this form, have them fill it out and bring it back to us and we'll parse that. So it's nothing about those individual steps are difficult. What's difficult is just combining all those steps up into this overall product so that it looks like with a customer, when you're talking to it, it's figuring it all out. When behind the scenes, it's like you were saying before, it's a whole bunch of subtasks that are being doled out to this thing. And ultimately, that's just orchestration. That's just like all these little pieces being combined to produce the illusion of an overall intelligence. And my argument to you is that that capability is going to be functionally the same as the capability of you hired someone else to do it. You hired an actual person to do it. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be like the Turing test. You're going to look at two different pen test reports. And one was just you or me doing this assessment for 3 weeks, where we had to do the interviews. And this other one launched off 780 agents and came back. And because the cost of inference is so short, the whole thing cost them $13, whereas they would have paid you or me 90 grand to do it.
I think that only works is if you can build the system with the system. Because if you're making all of these submodels to handle all of these like niche edge cases and these like specific domains of expertise, you need people in those domains of expertise to build those systems. So now essentially all you have is, rather than a bunch of pen test companies, you have the pen test company, which is every pen tester now working on building some model that can roughly emulate what a human pen tester would do. But that I would not see as a job replacement. I would see as a job shift. You would essentially just end up with this horrible late stage capitalist bullshit where everyone works for a single AI company, and no one has been replaced. We still need the same number of people, just they're building models to automate things instead of doing the things. But I don't see it as such a productivity boost that we would actually see like massive amounts of employees being lost. We would just see them going over to these AGI, I guess we would call it, companies to make these fake AGIs by like cobbling together a bunch of agents and submodels. But the amount of humans that you would need to build and maintain such a system would be like phenomenal. It would be like the biggest company on earth. So I wouldn't see that as people are going to be losing their jobs. I would see it as problematic because now you just have a monopoly that just it does everything, and that's going to be horrible for working conditions. But I wouldn't see that as a risk of, okay, now pen testers are obsolete, there's no more pen testers. Okay, medical professionals are obsolete, there's no more medical professionals. It would just be, everyone would just be like a medical professional working for an AI company.
Yeah, but aren't these all just modules though? So you have a module for going to collect more information when you don't know something. You have a module for summarizing that information and bringing it into the context. You have a module for, net learning some new thing, right? I mean, let's go back to the cardiologist. Think of how much schooling that cardiologist had to have, right? And how different the different scenarios are. I would argue it's not that much more complex than, or less complex than pen testing. So I think once you have a module for understanding pen testing really well, a lot of these concepts are general enough. They are abstracted enough that when an AI understands them deeply enough, it then, using your analogy here, or your concept, which I really like, it becomes knowledge. It becomes knowledge as opposed to intelligence. I really like this distinction. So when it understands, and that, by the way, I would already argue that we've already reached this with security. It's already really, really good at cybersecurity. We have, let me give you an example here. Okay, let me give you an example of an extremely dynamic situation. Right now on HackerOne, a completely automated AI system has the #1 spot. That means it's dealing with all sorts of random situations it's never seen before. It's doing its own research. It's finding new information on new technologies it's never seen before. It's launching all the attacks. It's actually showing proof and evidence that it can exploit it. It's actually submitting the reports and getting back the points with humans handoff. So, I mean, if that's not the level of complexity that can replace a knowledge worker, and let alone do a pen test, I mean, we already have all the evidence here. Like the models are already good at security. And if you could just gather more knowledge to put into the context, that's all you need.
But I think you have to ask yourself, like, how many people were working on that model? Like, is this now a model that is just on autopilot forever that requires no human interaction whatsoever, and it just sits and it does pen tests? Or does someone keep having to update systems behind the scenes? Because it kind of reminds me of that. I don't remember the name of the specific company, but there was this one company that was they were selling vibe coding, and they went bankrupt after it was found that there was no AI. It was just a bunch of people in an
Sure.
impoverished country writing the code for them. And essentially, this is all you're doing is an abstraction of this is you don't know how many people are behind the scenes working the AI. And I think that's kind of where the metrics get a bit skewy, because when we say someone was replaced with AI, we don't count how many jobs were gained by the creation of that AI. We're just like, oh, Jeff has been replaced with pentest.ai. That means one person has now lost their job to AI. And what you don't see is on the back end, there's 500 people making this AI actually do anything at all. So
Yeah.
I think that's my issue with this argument of like the job replacement, the people being unemployed, because at least from what I'm seeing, the amount of work that goes into actually maintaining and running these systems is equivalent to doing it manually still. So I don't see any world in which we're going to see something as crazy as like 90% job loss. And then that also assumes that everything is capped, right? That maybe pen testing is capped. Like maybe there is only so much security we can do. But then there's other industries where it's like, oh, we gained some productivity, we can do more now. So I would think that we would just see, assuming we can get an AI model that, just for the sake of argument, let's say it doesn't require any people. Like somehow we built an AI that just pilots itself, doesn't need any programmers, doesn't need any tweaks. It just works on its own. Would we not just take those systems and then focus into doing something more? Like maybe we go and mine materials from asteroids. Maybe we start sending probes to other planets within the galaxy. Like there's always more work to do. And the idea of like job replacement and job loss kind of hinges on this idea that there is finite work, there's finite productivity, and that the productivity isn't just being transferred to the AI side, and those people are just doing the same thing they were already doing, but for an AI company, and that like there is just a ceiling, and we hit this ceiling. It's like, okay, we don't need people anymore. Like we've done all the things we need to do, and I don't see either.
Yeah. So I think let's say it costs. Let's say it took. I actually don't know how big this company is that actually did the thing that I'm describing. I don't know how much human effort went into building the agents, but the thing running is not involving humans. It's actually the agents running that are doing the thing. Now you have a good point of like, well, those agents start to rot, and we have to maintain the agent. Sure, but let's say that's only 10 people or 100 people. The point is that is now replaceable infrastructure that the entire planet can use. So the planet can go and now run this company's application and point it at targets, and it could find vulnerabilities and submit reports. Now that the scaling of that infrastructure there to run that, I don't think it compares at all to let's say a million tests. Let's say a million pen tests, a million bug bounties or pen tests or whatever you're going to stick this thing on. Scaling up to how many humans are going to run that thing and how much they're going to cost versus a million instances of this AI, especially given look at the inference costs of AI and how they come down over like the last 2 years. I think we're paying like 0.01% or something of the inference cost of what we were paying 2 years ago. It's something extraordinarily like that. So there's no reason to believe that that's not going to keep falling. Who knows what the bottom level is? But the marginal cost for doing a pen test using this automated system is going to be way lower than adding yet another tester. Not only that, but the testers, they're humans. They move on. They stop being testers and move on to, they become managers or whatever. So I think the scalability, there's like no comparison.
Um, I could like, given your assumptions, I could maybe see that. I don't know about obviously the first thing I would steer away from is the whole prior performance, future results thing. Like if the costs are falling, that we can't just expect they're going to keep falling forever.
Sure, sure.
Um,
That's why I said
in
I know
fact,
where the bottom
yeah.
is.
In fact, we may actually see the opposite happen as we start to, like resources start to get constrained. We might actually see the costs start going back up because
That's true. That's true.
silicon's pretty hard to get. Energy is, we're kind of hitting our cap on energy right now, so we're having to build out more power plants, and those will end up getting factored into the cost of running these models. But with something like that, say pen testing, I could see in that specific example, yeah, I think we could probably automate it to make it cheaper. That's not because I think there's something fundamentally wrong with people or the AI is fundamentally good. It's because the industry is kind of a scam. We go and we bill like $100,000 for some dude to like spend 15 minutes running Nessus or something. So I think in a lot of those spaces, we could see I guess, full AI automation. But a lot of that stuff is really just, it was always automatable. Like you could have scripted a lot of that. It's just that no one was doing it. The real work, which is not being AI automated, is the stuff that is actually dynamic. Because like one of the things with bug bounties is it is very, very replicatable. Like you can reproduce it. There's only a very few classes of vulnerabilities, and if you go for something like low-hanging fruit, like cross-site scripting, you could write a Python script to go and find a million of those. And a lot of the older pen testers did do, bug bounty testers did do that. They were also automated, just not with AI. So that is like that is something that has always been automatable. Like I don't think AI has really made any amazing breakthroughs there. It might have maybe increased the scope of vulnerabilities that are automatable to a, I would say, a very small degree. But I don't think we're going to start seeing like large language models who are like writing novel exploits. Um, I think we're just going to see stuff that like was already automated, like fuzzing. Like fuzzing, I guess you could call automation. Like it's you basically just the equivalent of shaking a tree and seeing what falls out. You could put slap AI on that and say, oh look, we have AI automated pen testing. But a lot of those things were already automated or automatable. So I think I'd caution like the going from, hey, look, this thing is doing very well in an automated sense to cybersecurity is already like automatable. Because I personally stay away from pen testing. But I would say that's a very, very small portion of cybersecurity. And most of the parts of cybersecurity that like really do need doing isn't automatable. Like it's not stuff we could just set a pen test bot on and it'll fix the system. It's human problems. It's psychological problems. It's like actual complex problems that require critical thinking versus let's scan this code and look for XSS or integer overflows. Um, I think the what seems so significant there is that we just weren't doing it. Like we have had the capability to automate a lot of this for a lot of time, but we've just decided not to.
Doesn't
I think
doesn't
that
that apply to hundreds of millions of jobs?
um, I don't know. That's the thing is the issue is kind of that the people aren't doing the jobs. Like one thing I've noticed with vulnerability research is a lot of times what will happen is a company will they'll fix a vulnerability in their code base, like a very specific type of vulnerability, and they won't go and look for that same vulnerability in other parts of their own code base.
100%
So
agree.
they will, yeah. So they will fix one very specific instance of the vulnerability. Could we make a large language model that goes and finds the rest? Sure, but they could have and they should have done that. And essentially, all we're doing is we're making this huge, expensive model to pick up the slack that was
Yes,
just we just decided we
100%.
could have done it. We just decided not to.
So yeah, that's a perfect example of what I'm saying. So check this out. That thing I told you about, that bacteriophages, like 4 researchers, the best in the entire world, it turns out that they had a bias in their brain. They thought that, I'm going to mess this up because I don't know anything about the science, but there's something about a head and a tail of a bacteriophage. And like they combine in a certain way to be able to move and go spread. And so they were making this thing in their mind of like, well, it can't be this and it can't be this because heads can only go on tails the following way. So the AI was like, can't you just do this instead? That's probably why it's happening. When they both looked at it, they were like, oh my God, that is so simple. So a mental human bias caused them to miss this, which would have propelled science forward for so long. So it's exactly the same thing. So basically, did AI make a discovery there? It actually just found a human error but at scale. So now everyone in the world can use this model, and they can now do the same thing to all this hidden research that's sitting inside this archive of like raw data that's just sitting there. This raw data, in my opinion, contains, hey, if you put this molecule to this thing in this part of the cell, it will actually just do this, and like it'll change aging completely. And anybody who sees that, when the AI says it, they'll be like, that was obvious. That was completely obvious. So somebody like yourself could say, well, that wasn't actually intelligence. That was actually just noticing something and applying a rule. And what I'm saying is that mentality is missing the point of the benefit of the AI. Because whether it's pen testing or finding new drugs or finding new interactions or helping couples or solving, helping people get a healthier heart, it doesn't matter if it's basic, if it should be basic or simple for a human. I agree it should be, but it's not. So actually doing these complex things of pen testing and marriage counseling and cardiology, doing those things at scale as good or better than most people do them, most humans do them, is still a massive boon to society.
I agree with like what you just said in a vacuum. The issue I have, which I think we discussed previously on text, is that in order for these systems to exist and sustain, that human knowledge has to remain, right. Like we can't set and forget this AI and then suddenly we don't need to learn this entire subject, right? And one of the really big problems, which I've actually blogged about a lot, is the amount of data these models need in order to even like understand at a third grade level an area of expertise is phenomenal. And what happens is once we start relying on the systems, we lose our own knowledge because we're now just
Yeah,
deferring it to this system. But the system cannot sustain without this constant incoming flow of knowledge. And my big worry is that the more we automate with AI, the more skill loss we get on our end, which
yeah,
then down the line impacts our ability to feed it back into the AI and keep these AIs like in tip-top shape, which is where we would need like an actual genuine AGI. We would need an AI that at some point it can learn for itself. It can just it can teach itself new skills, which I don't think is possible. So then we run the risk of, sure, in the short term, can we like automate these bug bounties? Sure. Can we like find the solution to this bacteria thing? Sure. But in like 5, 10 years, when we now no longer have any pen testers and no longer any biologists or whatever the word is for people who do bacteria, then what? What happens now when like a new problem arises? Our AI needs to be
yeah,
trained on it. It needs a model built to address that problem, and suddenly like no one can do the thing anymore. It's actually
yeah,
it reminds me of, I don't remember the name of the movie, but there's a movie where I believe the aliens, they become so advanced that they forget how to do all the basics and they have to contact humanity and be like, yo, we actually kind of forgot how to do like this basic shit. Could you help us? Can you like bail us out, please?
yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, it's an interesting variation of thing. I don't know if you saw the MIT paper that basically said people who are using AI and kind of relying on it, their brains actually changed. Like you could physically see in their brains that they were less smart as a result of like using it as a
Holy
crutch.
shit.
Yeah, it was crazy. The sample size was really small, it was only 54 people, but it was the first example of like tangible difference of like somebody who's thinking for themselves versus using AI. So I do take your point there. Well, I think we've been going for a while. Any final thoughts? I gotta go get someone from BART, but any final thought? We could also do a second version too. So
Yeah, I'm down to do a follow-up. Yeah, no, my I did not actually see that paper, but that is terrifying. Like if people are actually losing like critical thinking ability, that's even worse than just like knowledge loss. That's like full on we're just gonna end up with idiocracy. So that
yeah,
is very concerning. But yeah, like my primary concerns have been purely like the economic model of it. If you've got these AIs just ingesting all this data, they're essentially stealing it. Like people don't like me using that term, but they are just taking copyrighted content. And the people who make that content, they make money from posting it from ad revenue. So my belief has always been that they would just collapse out under their own weight. They would cannibalize their source of information, and they would fail that way. But if they're also making humans dumber, that is an even more pressing problem because then I mean we're just doomed at that point. So I'm hoping that turns out to just be like the sample size was too small and maybe there was like some sampling bias where there's like a correlation between unintelligent people and just deferring their critical thinking to AI. But if that is the case, that like it's actually making intelligent people dumber, um, I think we're gonna have to unite to do something about that.
yeah, yeah. I unfortunately I don't think it's going to be a sample size issue. I think that's going to be reproducible. My explanation for it though is that there are some people who will do this. Arguably, even most people will do this. They'll just like rely, and pretty soon they won't be able to think for themselves, and that's extremely troubling. But there is also some other group, which I hopefully will include myself in, who is going to like train my AI to constantly badger me in like sort of a Socratic type of way to make sure that never happens, right? Because I'm going to be actively like defending against this. So I think people like that, they're going to accelerate. They're going to get smarter, even better at critical thinking. But that doesn't speak to the issue of like the other larger percent.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very, very large percentage because it's the same thing that makes social media work
Yeah,
and makes LLMs so attractive. It's the instant gratification that I don't have to put in too much work to get the results that I want. So I think that it's basically dopamine addiction to an extent. It's like
yeah,
people just love the idea of I don't have to go and read 100 books on programming. I can just make an app. So I
yep,
think what's going to happen is sure there will be people like you who do make their AI like keep them in like just challenge them. But I think for the overwhelming majority of the population, that like instant gratification is just going to take them down that rabbit hole of I'm not even going to think about the question I was just asked. I'm just going to type it into ChatGPT,
yeah,
which now is giving me a lot of anxiety.
yeah. Well, Marcus, this has been super fun. I think the conversation was great, and yeah, we should talk about doing a follow up maybe